So a little background on us. We've been in business since 2005. We are a PCI qualified integrator and reseller of payment systems. We're supporting our clients in setting up their payment processing, merchant services, PCI compliance, and then also providing merchant support as an extension of our client's treasury team. So anyone who's looking for help in either setting up or managing payment systems or supporting the departments with their systems, that's what we focus on. We are a WBE woman-owned business, originally founded by Deborah Jackson. And when we look at credit card processing, we know it is extremely complex, especially for a university. So you have multiple departments all using their own software systems and payment gateways in ways that they need to connect with credit cards, everything from how those customers come into the merchant environment, what systems you're using to process payments, the gateways, the acquirers and processors, and then obviously handling and making sure all this is efficient, secure, and PCI compliant. And again, for Arrow Payments, we provide full discovery for our clients if there's a solution you're looking for and you need help figuring it out, or if you want to determine how you can improve the payment systems or PCI compliance on your campus. Happy to come in, meet with your departments, put together recommendations on potential solutions. We're a big fan of point-to-point encryption. Today we'll be talking a little bit about IVR and DTMF technology to remove voice over IP, PCI compliance scope. We can also help in terms of managing vendors. We don't use any of our own technology, and ultimately helping our clients ensure that they can process their payments, provide installation, training, and then again, support. And we do not use any of our own technology, so work with whatever solutions are best for your university. So today, a little bit of background on voice over IP. It's kind of become more of a concern recently in the last few years, where universities are using voice over the internet protocol to communicate. So instead of using traditional phone lines with copper, plain old telephone lines, they're starting to transition more towards voice over IP technology. Where that becomes a concern is if your departments, foundation, anyone else, call centers are accepting credit card data over those networks, it now is considered that you're putting those networks potentially within PCI compliance scope, depending on how you're handling those details. So everything from whether you have a hard phone that you're picking up and talking through, that's whether or not that is connected to your computer or directly to the internet, if those phone lines are encrypted, if your departments are using soft phone applications through their computers, now is the computer also within PCI compliance scope? And ultimately, how do you segment where your voice traffic is going versus any digital traffic, let's say email, other internet traffic that's happening within your university? Again, creating a lot of complexities there from a PCI compliance standpoint. Some of the concerns ultimately are what's required for compliance, and when you start putting credit card data within the network, in many cases that is considered the same as if you were, whether you're speaking it or typing it or sharing it in some other form, it is now on your network and it needs to be compliant. And the guidance is that any network traffic that includes credit card data is something that should be considered within scope. And if you are putting credit card data on a network, that network is supposed to be segmented. It's supposed to be penetration tested on an annual basis. It's supposed to be vulnerability scanned quarterly. And so that can create a lot of issues or concerns for universities. I wanted to share a couple of ways of looking at how voice over internet traffic can be combined with the other traffic that's happening on a network, and how you need to figure out exactly what's within scope and what's outside of scope. And so this is just one way of looking at voice over internet traffic, whether that traffic is starting on a laptop, starting on a cell phone, a tablet, a desk phone. Is it a voice over IP network similar to this diagram down here, where the phone is voice over IP, but it's connecting then, or the phone was actually analog, but then it's connecting back to a voice over IP network. And then where do these networks end, and where does the general internet begin, and how is it commingled with whatever other traffic is happening within your campus? This is another way of looking at voice over IP networks. So again, IP telephones, traditional telephones that are then converted to IP over a corporate LAN. Even fax machines can be a traditional fax machine with a copper line that's an analog fax machine, but if it's connected back to a converter that sends it over voice over IP traffic, where do those concerns put your school in terms of compliance? In looking at the PCI compliance requirements, there is documentation that came out in November of 2018 that talks about protecting telephone-based payment card data and voice over IP networks. Within this document, which is available online, if you have questions, you can send us an email. Happy to send a copy of this to you or a link. But they basically lay out a few different diagrams. So this is more of a traditional setup where if calls are coming in over plain old telephone system or analog lines, dial-up regular phone lines, not voice over IP, how is that traffic coming in? And then if it's being entered into a dial-up terminal, your only PCI compliance scope is that dial-up terminal, and you don't have to worry about protecting the network. If, however, you are using voice over IP phone system, you could be using a third-party provider where you're transitioning that call over to a call center. And now you're looking at not only your phone systems, if it's voice over IP, but who's the call provider and what scope are they bringing into your PCI compliance requirements. To go further in, as this picture becomes more complicated and you start adding servers onto the same networks, multiple phone systems, multiple departments all using the same phone system, you create a bigger mess or a bigger challenge to try to meet PCI compliance scope. And so this is where we've been coming in to try to help our clients figure out some of these details, find solutions that will work for them. And we've seen a number of different ways that schools have been approaching this situation. And then just one more diagram from the PCI Council, providing even more complexity. So what is compliant if you need to be able to take payments over the phone? From the standpoint of what our clients are doing, if you're using just plain old telephone service or analog phone lines, then you should be fine. There shouldn't be any issues. But if you're getting into voice over IP is where you potentially have concerns. The pros of using old telephone lines, copper lines, analog lines, dial-up lines, however you want to refer to them, is that they're not within PCI compliance scope, and you're not basically putting data on a network that it can be compromised from a internet hacker standpoint. The problem with using plain old telephone lines is that they can be expensive. Access to those lines can become more difficult. You have to actually run traditional copper lines throughout your networks or your buildings there on campus. And a lot of schools have been telling us that analog phone lines are no longer going to be available in their area in the near term. Your next option would be to segment the network. So then you are setting up a separate network specifically for any voice over IP traffic that is going to accept or transmit credit card information. In that scenario, you now have to set up a separate network. It needs to be segmented, needs to be encrypted, vulnerability scanned, penetration tested on an annual basis, and complete the 329 SAQD controls, which can be very expensive. The advantage of that is you could still then use your voice over IP networks and allow your departments to use those lines for accepting payments, but it can be very expensive. And now you're basically putting the responsibility of protecting that credit card data within your IT department and within your networks. Some other alternative payment options that we've seen some schools take in terms of trying to avoid this situation. In some cases, we've seen schools say, all right, we're not going to accept payments over the phone anymore, so we're going to set up online options and then just send all of those payers to make their own payments in more of an SAQA situation. In other cases, we've seen and are working with schools who are setting up cellular options so that people are literally using a cell phone to accept payments so that that phone traffic is not on the university's network. Because of the way smartphones work today, we would recommend using an old flip phone. So rather than a smartphone where you can then start bringing in all kinds of other issues into that smartphone and having to protect that data, you're best off using a traditional flip phone rather than a smartphone. Smartphones also can connect over to your Wi-Fi network, in which case now you've defeated the purpose of getting that data off of your network. Then you could also just set up a single call center location where you could send all of the payment data where it is using old standalone POTS lines or analog dial-up lines, and then that location would accept all of the phone payments for the school, process those payments, and then set them up per which department needs to receive those payments. Fourth option here is you set up a third-party call center that's totally separate from your operations, and now you're in more of an SAQA situation where you're totally outsourcing those payments to a bank or an area where they can process those payments for you completely off your campus and off your network. And then the last option here is just stop accepting payments at all, which I don't think is a good option for most schools. Again, if you have any questions as we're walking through this, feel free to use the chat and we'll get to them near the end. So let's talk a little bit about IVR and DTMF masking. So this is another option where you're basically taking the traffic that would be accepting the credit card information and moving that away from your network so that only the voice portion of the traffic is passing across your networks. And then anyone who needs to make a payment is using a phone and basically typing it into their phone that cannot be heard by your staff members. So it's basically moving your voice over IP traffic away from PCI compliance scope. The pros of this is obviously you could continue then using your voice over IP phone lines, and in some cases reduce the amount of time people are spending accepting payments over the phone, because there are some self-service options here where payers can log in, dial a phone number, and actually make a payment without ever talking to someone in person. A great option for donations and those types of things. The negatives here are the complexity of setting this up, as well as the costs that can be associated with either IVR or DTMF masking. So what's the difference between IVR and DTMF? IVR is interactive voice response, and that's basically where the entire call gets redirected to a location where the person is now interacting with a computer or interacting with a system that's outside of your network and entering their own card data, and there's not a person from your staff there listening to the call or taking any of the phone payment information. That can be, a standalone phone number. It can be something that you're redirecting the calls to, but ultimately trying to get you into a place where the call data is not coming into your network for that credit card information. DTMF masking is basically splitting the call so that the voice traffic is going over one portion of that call directly into your facilities across your voice over IP networks, but before the call enters your facilities, all the dial tone traffic from that call is redirected outside of your network, so that someone can type into their phone their card data without it being heard or transmitted across your voice over IP network. And so in this situation, again, you can reduce your PCI compliance scope. In some cases, you can set it up where a staff member can still be on the phone with that person and talking them through the process of entering their card data without hearing it. And in some cases, you can even set it up where the person who is your staff member can see, basically hashed digits within their computer system, so they know exactly where the person is at in terms of making this payment or entering their card data, so that you're not sitting in a situation wondering, did I send this person off to nowhere, and did they actually even make this payment? So a couple of different options here. Generally speaking, DTMF masking is going to be more expensive than a simple standalone IVR solution. From an IVR standpoint, you literally can have a standalone phone number where you send your traffic and people make their payments on their own. When you get into DTMF masking is where you have those options to stay on the phone with the person without hearing the credit card data. So with that said, we have been working with a couple of our clients now to understand what options are out there. And we've put together a little video here to share with you from Western Michigan University, where we helped them set up an IVR solution for their call center.
My name is Jason Barnes, Western Michigan University. Title is Director of Advancement Services, working in the Office of University Advancement. And what my group provides is the hardware, data, software, and analysis for all of the fundraising efforts. So we are chiefly concerned with how we can bring in funds through as many different vehicles as possible. Phone calls through our call center, our in-house call center is one of those primary vehicles. The university's interpretation of PCI compliance left us needing to figure out how to exclude voice credit card communications over a phone. So as I'm on the phone as a caller speaking to you as a donor, and you speak your credit card number to me, that was putting our entire VoIP phone network within that PCI environment. And therefore, we were going to have to take all the steps necessary to validate the entire network of the university. To say that that is a mountain to climb is to say that Everest is just a mountain on the planet. That was not a thing we were prepared to do. So the interpretation at our university of PCI compliance, meaning that if I said my credit card number over the VoIP phone, that would put the entire network within the need to pass PCI compliance. That really was the largest hurdle. So then going to leadership and explaining to them, why do we need this thing? Why is PCI compliance important? That was the next hurdle. All of those things are fairly straightforward once you understand why we really care to not put our cardholder data at risk or our institution at risk, the reputation of our institution. All of those things, those arguments became very clear to leadership once explained. I think really about the PCI compliance in general. I've got individuals who ask me, who have said, and this has been multiple different occasions, multiple different projects, why does Western Michigan University care so much about PCI compliance? And they will cite examples of when I worked at X university or when I worked at Y university, we just did this thing. And the answer to that is because we care about our constituents. We care about our donors' identity as well as their funds. And just like a relationship between a family member or a friend of mine, I don't want to put them at any risk that I don't have to. And the rules are fairly straightforward. Nothing is hidden from you. There's no secret way to meet with success. It's all very straightforward. So take the time to know what the rules are, and crossing those hurdles really is not that difficult. Yeah, it gets dicey, it gets complicated. So don't store this data, don't pass it this way. Sure, no problem. We were lucky to have a vendor who facilitated developing that IVR solution. Now, coming into it, I was not familiar with what an interactive voice response unit was, but then realized, oh my goodness, I've already interacted with these in many other business instances. Also being part of the PCI committee, knowing these things were coming before being the person needed to implement it, I think that left me holding enough knowledge to meet with success. So yeah. person, a donor in our case, it's fairly simple. You're on the phone talking to your new friend at Western, our caller. And when you want to make a donation, you're simply transferred over to this AI, a computer voice, just asks you those simple questions for the credit card number, the expiration date, the little security number on the back, and all the good stuff. And then as soon as you successfully enter those stuff, you are kicked back to the caller, who can thank you for your donation and continue that conversation in a very natural human way. So it was a terrific solution that really melded our technical business requirements with our desire to maintain relationships through a transaction, because we wanted this not to just be a fiscal transaction, we want it to be a relationship. And so using that technology really helped us to bridge the gap. In our case, we were very fortunate that our service provider for our phone service hopped in and did all the programming and the connection for that IVR. So we didn't have to do that in-house. Great value to that relationship there. And if you can find a vendor to do that for you, I would highly recommend it. Let's see. So the result of that was cutting out that our entire network. So now we have no credit card numbers, no personal credit information that passes into our computer systems, passes over our phone lines. And that allows us to keep our PCI compliance without having to climb those Mount Everest or various other hurdles. We're able to keep that certification without going all that far. But we do have the capability both for incoming and outgoing calls. So if an individual calls in, it's fairly the same process as our outgoing call. Only difference is who originates the call. Once we get to that point of transaction, the button push for the caller on my side to send the donor into that IVR environment is just the same. It collects all the same data, as in we get a feedback of the donor, the name on the credit card, the last four of the credit card, and one other item that we use for matching transactions on the back end, as our accountant is reconciling their data. Well, we allowed our vendor to navigate that entire aspect for us. So they already had, I believe, hooks in with specific gateway providers, which we were already using as well. And so then connecting which IVR solution they chose had to meet that functionality. Specifically, as with any project, we got our list of requirements from our stakeholders, need to haves and like to haves, and put that against the matrix of what all those potential vendors have. So we got very fortunate that vendor already had that capability. And so we got really lucky there. Most of our challenges are around data passing automagically, if you will, from one system to the other. And so we've got a couple more manual processes than what I would prefer. But none of those are individuals keying in any data. Recurring payments and locking those in is definitely an aspect of our more donors, more dollars, which some people call it a mission. I call those metrics, but that's all right. Take time and do your research, but also rely on the partners and experts that are out there. There are people who've done this work before, and not every vendor is the same, but get down to brass tacks and see what they can really do for you, and know what you need done. Yeah, and I tell you, having come from the private sector to education or nonprofit, either way you slice it, there seems to be a lot of mindset of, oh, we can't do what business does, or we can't do these things. We don't have budget. We don't have people. You can get around not having resources by relying on partners. You can get around budget by identifying the things that truly save you money or bring you in more money in the long run. So yeah, relying on vendors or subject matter experts in the area is terrific. We can't know everything. We live in a specialized society. I know some things, you know some things, we come together. We know more things as a team. So relying on good partners, specifically like Arrow Payments, can really help pave the way to success. It shortens your need to know everything and educate yourself, and can really accelerate a project timeline because you're relying on those people who have built the wheel before, who have climbed Mount Everest before, and can guide you on that path, coach you on that path. Can really, you know, when it comes down to it, save you from the bruises that they themselves or some of their other partners may have gone through before. So yeah, I highly recommend looking to the subject matter experts, vendors in the space, and definitely recommend payments. I think we got lucky by making it through. And I say that for almost every project because, oh my goodness, side quests, unknowns, all the good stuff.
So some of the questions were related to, customer service and whether or not an IVR situation, creates any problems. There's really a couple of options there. One is if you do want to stay on the call with the caller, DTMF is going to be your better option, because in that scenario, you can literally stay on the call with the caller, with the payer, and talk to them as they enter their information. And then depending on the solution that you select, you can actually see the data being entered into a computer screen that's integrated with the payment gateway, so that you see how many digits they've entered. You can see, their expiration date as an example. You can't see the credit card information itself, but you can see that they're entering it, walk them through it, see if it's successful or not successful, and proceed from there. For those who have concerns about whether or not the call is coming into the university network versus going out, one of the other options is to use a third-party provider for the phone system and set up only those departments who need to use that third-party solution for the phones, and then redirect out to the IVR for the payment portion. So the call data is not all coming in through your university network. It's being hosted in a third party. That third party can control whether or not the call is going over to the system for them to enter the card data and separate that information from you. And again, you're not on the phone connected to that person when they are making those payments. They're in an IVR scenario being sent directly over to a different section, if you will, to try to explain that situation. So here's an example of how IVR would work. So the sales rep is talking to someone on the phone, and they are being, talking with the client. The client is then redirected to the payment information. In some of the IVR situations, you can see the card data being entered into the system, but you no longer have a connection to that person. You're not talking to them anymore. They're on their own. And in some cases, you can pull that call back either after it's successful or the payment has failed, or if the person, seems to be having any problems, they can redirect themselves back to the sales rep, but they're no longer connected verbally to that salesperson. When you start getting into these options, in many cases, you're using probably a soft phone on the computer. You can also set up a hard phone coming in. But again, that phone connection is controlled outside of your environment, and the provider is determining whether the person is now connected to you, or if that person is now directed and reconnected to the IVR voice response system to enter their credit card data separate from the connection to you or your staff member. And this is just a screenshot of what a soft phone option would look like, so that you can see where the person is at and what they've entered so far. Here's an example of IVR costs and the implementation. This is specific for the quote that we had for Western Michigan University. Just to give you an idea, So again, IVR, a little bit easier to get set up because you're going completely through a third party for your phone connection, your phone numbers, all of those details, and then that is being set up outside of your network. So $5,000 setup, 5 cents per minute. That's when they are, talking with you through that system, and then $3 for every successful transaction. If you have a lot of transactions, this can become more expensive than going to DTMF. But to give you an idea, this is what the costs roughly were for this situation. For DTMF masking, basically the call is coming in to the carrier. They are redirecting the call traffic before it comes into the university, and so they're able to grab the touch tone information and still send the voice traffic across, and that's how you're able to stay on the phone with the payer or the caller while they are entering the credit card data. And so that call is basically being intercepted outside of your network and then controlled as to what data is coming into your network and what data is being kept outside of your network. These are companies currently today using DTMF as an example, just to know that there are organizations using this technology and that it is working well for them. And this is sort of the process of setting up DTMF, at least in this scenario. So again, this is another company that we've been working with, and actually Northwestern University is considering this option for their DTMF. And so this is how they approach getting this set up, but it's basically 8 to 10 weeks of a process to make sure that traffic, again, is being intercepted before it comes into your network and your systems. And this is an example, again, of DTMF costs and implementation. So setup cost and then an annual license. Again, this can be a better option for you depending on how many calls you expect to be accepting through DTMF for processing these payments. Here's some examples of departments and sort of the recommendations that we made as to whether or not you would want to go through every individual department to send them over to IVR or continue to use plain old telephone service lines, or to set up some other type of a system for these areas, or potentially just tell them, no, you're not allowed to accept payments based on your volume, and then send those payments over to a hosted payment page instead. Again, lower volume, the more you're going to want to try to push those departments to using some other option versus taking payments over the phone, given the cost of setting these systems up. So next steps, if you were interested in proceeding with IVR DTMF, obviously, figure out whether or not you're serious, you're interested, who the constituents are. From there, request formal proposals from the IVR solutions or DTMF solutions. Schedule demonstrations, select a solution, implement the technology, and train the users. So this is sort of a very high level project plan in terms of how we've helped other schools try to figure this out in selecting vendors. With that said, I believe we have a few minutes left here, and I'm going to go through the chat and see what other questions may exist or thoughts that I can share. So one of the people asked about cell phone strategy. How do you handle the transfer if someone's calling in to make the payment to the cellular number without asking them to hang up and call this number? Given that you can't tap POTS lines with the butt set and physical access, how come use of such lines doesn't bring certain physical areas in PCI scope? The PCI scope piece is obviously all controlled by the PCI Council and what they have dictated as their biggest concerns. In terms of using the cell phone strategy, we would recommend that you start using the cell phone either for outgoing calls where you're calling the person back from a cell phone, or you're using that cell phone number as the primary number for accepting payments. And so that would just be a detail that you would have to work through in terms of what's best for your school. That way it keeps your network out of scope, because as one of the other comments was made on here, if that call is coming in through your traditional voice over IP system without DTMF or the ability to break apart that call, that phone connection is potentially still coming through your network and then going back out to a forwarded line. And so you're still hosting that traffic in some cases. Again, it depends on how your phone system is set up, what type of voice over IP you're using, and where the connection to the internet is. But if it's coming in through your network and you're still hosting it and then sending it back out, you now potentially still have issues, even though you've now sent that call to another number. So one of the other people asked, if the customer is allowed to choose any internet-enabled device to complete their payment, why can't using their own phone call with the university network be considered their choice? It is their choice to obviously call in. It's their choice what phone they use, or whether they're using a soft phone or a VoIP or what have you when they call you, but they do not have control over your network or your phone system. And as soon as that credit card data touches your network, you are now responsible for it. So similar to if they were going online to make a payment and you were hosting a website, you control that website, you manage the website's now accepting credit card data, you are now responsible for the PCI compliance of that website. And so it's very, similar type of a situation. Regardless of how they get to the website or regardless of how they call you is their choice, but as soon as it comes to you, you are now responsible for that credit card information. Someone else asked whether or not a billing address is needed for payment in these cases. It depends, again, on how you set this up. So if you're using DTMF, you could be on the call with the payer and collecting that information. So if you needed the address, you could do that, or any other data, while they then enter the card information through the dialing on their phone. The other option is you use DTMF where they're just entering in their card data, expiration date, maybe CVV, and zip code without entering any of the actual address information. And then once that's processed, you can either pull the call back, or if you're talking to the person beforehand, they're providing that information before you transfer the call over to the IVR. Outside of that, you could collect the phone number and call them back, which wouldn't be ideal, I don't think, from a customer service standpoint, to collect that other data, or approach it in another way to gather that information. So another person mentioned that with DTMF, the POS vendor was not willing to modify their data capture screen to accept the DTMF token instead of the full card number. Obviously, you're playing with a lot of different variables here. So you have your phone provider, you have your DTMF or IVR provider, which are usually two different vendors. You then have probably a gateway provider, which is a third vendor, and then you have your payment processor, which is a fourth vendor. In some cases, the payment processor and gateway can be the same company, but in the instances we've worked through, we're working with the IVR and DTMF provider to figure out which payment gateway is going to be, available, or gateways, and then work directly with that school to figure out which of those gateways is going to integrate with their payment processor. Outside of that, potentially setting up new merchant accounts specifically for this solution to address their ability to accept payments via IVR or DTMF if their current gateways or payment processors are not able to handle this type of a setup. The first contact is with, say, the university switchboard. Hello, I would like to talk to someone at the University Advancement about a donation. As an example, we were back into the hairpin situation. That is true. If somebody were calling in potentially on how, again, the phone traffic is routed, you may have to train your call center staff or whoever the person is who first connects with that call to provide the phone number for them to call in to make a payment versus transferring that call, if it's transferring, again, back through your systems out to the IVR or DTMF technology. Again, that's a training situation and something else amongst all these complicated details that have to be thought through and looked at in order to set this up correctly and ensure that even if you are using IVR or DTMF, that it is being leveraged in a way where it is reducing your PCI compliance scope. Last question on here was, do we have any statistics on breaches related to voice over IP? I do not have any offhand, but we'd be happy to do some research and provide some statistics there. We're constantly setting up, even just complimentary consultation calls, online meetings, walking through some of these details. If anyone at your institution would like to, see this presentation, we can send a copy of the recording or schedule a time to walk through it with them, or just discuss your situation, your goals, and offer some advice from a friendly standpoint, just to see if we can be helpful. and then from there, discuss any ways that we can actually help you select and implement a solution if that's a direction that you'd like to go. So feel free to contact us with any questions you have regarding payment systems, merchant services, PCI compliance, and in relation to those systems, as well as supporting your departments. Happy to share our experience, best practices other schools are using, and ways we can be helpful to your organization.